Good morning, everybody. Today is November 14th, which you probably already know. Our speaker today is Reverend David Powers from church. You have seen him before. But we welcome him to class for the first time, to make the function for the first time. There's no class next week. There's no class the week after that. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Are there any other announcements? There are various Advent events that will be happening before and during Advent. We would encourage you to check those out and sign up for those. Is there anything else? All right.
Very good. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you for the invitation to be with y'all this morning. As he said, this is my first time teaching a class here at the church. And so I have to start with a confession. I am not, like you often will hear from in this class, a professor of any kind. I'm not a teacher in the traditional sense. I've been really shaped by the spoken word and what it looks like to prepare sermons and things like that. But I'm excited for us to dig into a couple different topics today. Really, it's going to be two main ones for us. We are going to talk about rest and remembering. Rest and remembering. Those are going to be the two areas where we focus our attention. But this morning, I want us to start in a different way. Joshua Narcissus will be preaching for us today. He is a dear friend of mine, somebody that I've become close with over my first 9 months here. And oh yes, that'd be great. He is a dear friend of mine that we've gotten to know each other really well over my first 9 months here in Memphis. And we gather on Monday afternoons with a group of other clergy from town. These are clergy that some have been here just a couple weeks and some have been here just a few years. And he gathered us together because we think that clergy need people to walk alongside them, other clergy. We can sit in a room together and pray together and learn together. Hey, Jim Cole. And so he really has shaped the way I understand starting time together. So what we do is we center ourselves in a breathing practice, and then in a prayer, and then we begin our time. So that's what we'll do this morning. The centering practice for us is going to be from Howard Thurman. Maybe some of y'all are familiar with Howard Thurman. So he is a contemporary, really a 20th century mystic who has great influence in a bunch of Christian circles. And so he's been someone for me that has been a great teacher to me. And so we'll use one of his prayers here to begin our time. But before that, I'm going to invite you to get a posture that is comfortable to you, maybe both your feet on the floor, your hands could be open or some other posture, whatever that needs to look like. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. I want you to take a deep breath in. Fill up your lungs and then breathe it out slowly. Take another deep breath in, filling your lungs. And breathe it out slowly. Feel present here with your breathing. Feel present in this classroom, in the seat that you are seated in. Feel comfortable as you start to pay attention to your breathing. With each breath in and each breath out, I want you to think about the breath of God that fills each of us. So breathe in deeply and then breathe out. With your eyes still closed, hear these words from Howard Thurman. How good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see one's self pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashing and noisy silences. While something deep within us hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting lull, with full intensity we seek, ere the quiet passes, a fresh sense of order in our living, a direction, a strong, sure purpose, that will structure our confusion and bring meaning in our chaos. We look at ourselves in this waiting moment, the kinds of people we are. The questions persist. What are we doing with our lives? What are the motives that order our days? What is the end of our doing? Where are we trying to go? And where do we put the emphasis? And where are our values focused? For what end do we make sacrifices? Where is my treasure? What do I love most in life? What do I hate most in life? And to what am I true? Over and over, the questions beat in upon the waiting moment as we listen. Floating up through all the jangled echoes of our turbulence, there is the sound of another kind. It's a deeper note, which only the stillness of the heart makes clear. It moves directly to the core of our being. Our questions are answered. Our spirits refreshed. And we move back into the traffic of our daily round with the peace of the eternal in our step. How good it is, beloved, to center down. So you can open your eyes if you haven't already. Welcome in, folks. Is it working okay?
Yeah, I'm backing it up just a little bit so I can actually see your head.
Oh, that makes sense.
We're good.
Okay, good. Very good. So I said we're going to talk about two things this morning. And we'll actually have a little third section here, because here's what I imagine. I know many of you, we've met, we've spoken, but I want to leave a little bit of time at the end for any questions y'all might have about perhaps the lesson or even for me. Okay, so we will talk about rest, we will talk about remembering, memory, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end just for some questions. Okay, our guiding text this morning is going to be from the Gospel of Matthew. And hopefully it's a familiar one to you. It's from the 11th chapter, verses 28 through 30. These are the words of Jesus Christ. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So they always say that you shouldn't write a sermon that isn't preaching to you, right? And so this morning, when I was thinking about what the lesson needed to be, I realized that I think this will be a lesson for y'all. I know it's a lesson for me too, even in preparing. And it's the significance and the importance of rest. What does that look like, particularly for us who are busy with things of the world that are going on in our lives? They might be social things or business related things, or even things that are going on here at church. And so these words of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew, really, they give us an insight into what it is that Jesus desires from us. I think that Jesus has this way of seeing within us things that we need. And one of the things that we need is the ability to slow down and to take a deep breath and to rest. So in this gospel passage, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and and I will give you rest. And you must think this is important. He practices rest all the time. He practices rest when, let me see my head. He practices rest. He practices rest when he is about to make a big decision. In the Gospel of Luke, the 11th chapter, or I'm sorry, the 6th chapter, excuse me. This is verse 12. Now, during those days, Jesus went out to the mountain to pray, and he spent the night in prayer to God. He was trying to figure out who the 12 disciples were going to be. And before he made that decision, it was crucial that he went away and he spent a night just praying and resting and preparing to make that decision. Later on, in his ministry, he would do great miraculous things, and then he would go away to rest. And so there might be 5,000 or even 15,000, depending on how you count folks back in the day, and that he would feed, right, with just the most meager of resources. And then he would go away to rest. After that, he would heal people, and then he would go away to rest. He would, just before suffering in the Passion, he would go away to a quiet place to pray and to rest over and over and over again. There is this pattern for Jesus of what it means to engage really fully in the life and ministry to which he's been called, and then to draw back, to rest. One of the commandments, y'all might know this one, has to do with rest. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, right? 6 days you shall labor, but on the seventh you shall rest. I had a professor tell us a decade ago that this is the only commandment that we openly and proudly break all the time, right? In fact, our system, our society is kind of built on this idea: the more we do, the more valuable we are, right? So we just keep going and going and going. We openly defy this. And when we do that, we, I think, are working against this natural divine pattern of how life is supposed to be. So there's supposed to be this rhythm to how we move through the world. And an essential part of that is rest. We can see this in ourselves. We can also see it in nature. Maybe y'all are familiar with the Old Testament practice of a fallow year. Y'all familiar with this? So, okay, good. Lots of heads nodding. Yeah. So the field is tilled and planted and harvested for 6 years, and then on the seventh year, nothing happens. Y'all may or may not know that for pastors, that's actually why we get sabbaticals on our seventh year, right, of service, ideally, at least. And that is because the idea is we tilled and we planted and we harvested, and now we need to simply let the field rest for a while. If we don't do that, what happens? If you say it again?
Burnout.
Yeah, burnout. Yeah. How about for the field? What happens in the field if you keep trying to plant? Loses its nutrients, Rick says. Absolutely. Yeah. So what we were producing cannot be produced as well as it was before, because over time we have this diminishing thing. But the way that creation is designed, it is so that we might be rejuvenated, or creation might be rejuvenated over time. I was thinking about resting because, hopefully we're moving towards the end of this pandemic in its particular form for us right now, right? And so what that's made me do is to look back a little bit and think a little bit about what the experiences of the last, let's say, 18 to 20 months have been. And do y'all remember what it was like, those who perhaps weren't in the medical field, and then you're in the medical field, it was a completely different thing, right? But for many, when things began to shut down in that second weekend of March of 2020, there was this period of about 3 months, 4 months maybe, right? Where things really quieted down. I mean, the traffic stopped, right? There were pictures of these cities all across our world that are known and notorious for pollution, right? And they were clear. There were all these for me, at least in my context then, there were all these times and opportunities of, I was getting to see my friends play with their children, which I know was bringing joy to them. It was also tiring a little bit to them, but it was this space, this kind of, as I've heard one person describe it, this great pause, right? And everyone took a deep breath, even in the midst of the turmoil that was going on around us and all the devastation of the pandemic. If in your small space you took a deep breath. And in the midst of that, there was connection that was happening. There was rejuvenation that was happening. And there was something that happened in that great pause. Now, interesting, the tension in this, of course. Even as many were having that great pause, there were many others that were ramping up. I think about Thor leading a school at that time, right? That was a great pause for some, not so much for you. Yeah, no. Probably for Linda and for others as well. Not so much a great pause, but great activity that needed to happen. Can you think back to those first 4 months of the pandemic? And would you just entertain me for a little bit here with some word association for you? What were the things, what are the words that come up for you when you think about those first few months let's say from March to June of 2020? What are some words that come up for you thinking back to that time?
Loss.
Loss.
Alone.
Alone.
Peace.
Peace.
Grief.
Say it again.
Grief.
Grief.
Fear.
Jigsaw puzzle.
Jigsaw. There's one over here. Denial. Yeah. Interesting. Any others?
Closed.
Closed.
Delivery.
Yeah. So it's interesting what happens in the pause. And I think Jesus, the life and ministry of Jesus kind of shows us a couple different ways in which the emotions that come into that space that's created when we rest, right? There can be a sense of peace, right? There can also be a deep sense of grief that comes into that space. There can be fear and worry. There can be a reckoning with the great loss that has happened. Let's say it's personal. It seems to me that part of the rhythm, the divine rhythm of life, to create this space, actually to really dictate that we must take this space, if we actually take the commandment seriously, it is to open us up to all of the dimensions of what it means to be human, right? The most delightful and the most difficult. But it seems to me like we had those experiences that we needed to have in that. And often that's what happens when we create space. Thurman there speaking about the busy streets of our minds. What happens when we hush ourselves enough to hear those streets is we feel all the different feelings that we might have. Jesus does this. He experiences this in the garden just before he will be arrested. He is there alone. And do y'all remember what the request that he makes of God in that time? Has to do with a cup. Yeah, if you can, if it be your will, please take it away from me. The risk for us of taking rest is that we will feel all of the feelings of that open space. It's a risk if we've just lost somebody that we love, right? To take that pause. It's a risk if there are some actual existential threats for us to actually think about those in depth. It's also a risk that we'll have to take some things really seriously if we discover them from within us. And that's why I think often, not sure about you, but it's easier for us not to do that, right? We just keep moving as quickly as we can. And we hear the words of Jesus, come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. But we say, we'll just carry these heavy burdens. Actually, we'll pretend like we're not carrying these burdens, right? We'll let them be. And we'll just keep going. Over time, though, we realize we're actually not built for that. So it's interesting. Are y'all familiar? Y'all are familiar with agriculture. So y'all are familiar with the yoke, right? The yoke is this idea that, it can be placed on one beast or it can be placed on multiple. In this particular sense, it sounds like Jesus is saying, you're not meant to till this field alone, right? So I have this yoke, you should take this upon you as well. And we together will navigate this world and do this difficult work. But what's really interesting about that for me is that we just want to carry it on our own. We just want to carry the yoke. We think we're supposed to because that's what the world teaches us. One of the benefits, though, for me, when it comes to actually taking this idea of rest seriously, is what happens within us. When we take rest, what is it that happens within our souls? This just yesterday, we had a 5K out here. Gib was out here running, made a great time, by the way. And it reminded me of something a box that I had not opened in a while. So I got done with the 5K and I went home and I decided I was going to devote just 180 minutes, right, to rest. So just give me 3 hours. That's all I need of rest. And I went into the drawer in my guest room and I pulled out this box. These are size 11 Brooks Ghosts running shoes. They smell a little bit. So I have in here, sometimes I'm really organized. And I have in here a spreadsheet that has it's tiny. You don't need to see the numbers, but I have in here 2 pages of a spreadsheet. 4.04 miles, 3.36 miles, 7.4 miles, and it goes all the way up to a half marathon from October 21st all the way until June 10th. Okay, I printed this out and I kept these shoes. I don't keep all my shoes, right? But here's what happened during my time of rest yesterday. I went in and I pulled these shoes out and I started thinking about what these shoes did for me. Okay, so October 21st through June 10th, and that was 18 through 19. Okay, October 21st of 18 through June 10th of 2019. So I ran in these a whole lot. I was a little bit skinnier back then. Memphis barbecue will put it on you. But I would run in these almost daily. And a couple things happened. Let's see. The first was that about a month into owning these shoes, I got a call from a guy named Mitchell Red. Yeah. First week in November of 2018, Mitchell Red called me. And we talked. There was this church on a river way far away from where I was from. And he wanted to talk to me about it. So that was something that happened. Then just before Christmas, my sister went into the hospital, right? And her body wasn't doing all that well. And then the 23rd day of February of 2019, she passed away. I ran 5 miles that day just to get out all I needed to get out. And then I, even though I should have gotten rid of them way before, I said, I got to keep running these shoes. So I ran in them through the beginning of the summer of that year. Here's the thing. These have been sitting in the drawer. I moved them. I unpacked them. I put them in the drawer. But I haven't thought about them in a while. Yesterday, though, when we got done running, I said, I need a rest. And this is where the Spirit led me to come and to think about this and to think about what these shoes carried me through. What season of life, right? What roads I had to walk down for those 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months. When I slowed down enough to pause and rest, I was reminded of God with me, God being with me in this, right? In my weariness, coming to God in Christ and saying, I can't walk this road alone. I need you to walk it with me. And God meeting me there in that place. Here's what I'm thinking about this morning. Many of us are navigating all sorts of different things. Perhaps it's still grief. Perhaps that grief is fresh, maybe even in the last week, right? And there are many things that would keep us going, keep us occupied, keep us from pausing so that we might reflect and remember and give space. Y'all, today in worship, we're going to celebrate All Saints Day. which is a significant day in the life of our church. And I'm thinking back, and I'm wondering for you, when we pause, just even in this space, where your memory goes and who you think about on this day. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't entertain sharing that with me and with us today. When we pause, we take rest in this moment, and we remember. When I say All Saints Day, and I say that together we're going to remember all the saints who have passed in the last year, who comes to your mind this day? Barbara.
Steve Montgomery, Carol Good, Faye.
Steve Montgomery, Carol Good, and Faye.
The names just flood my brain
Hmm.
in my heart. I stopped counting after 15.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's been a while. That was before my aunt died, my father died, my cousin died. And I've long looked forward to the time when we can collectively process that grief and celebrate.
Can you say the last part?
Celebrate.
Celebrate.
And I hope that time comes soon.
Thank you.
My brother died. And his granddaughter died within a month of each other. And next to Mike, he was the most important person in my whole life, always. So it was an incredible experience to lose him. He was my heart.
When did he pass?
March.
Others?
There's so many friends that we lost during this pandemic, and you don't get closure because they haven't had a service or anything, and I think of them all the time. My mind has not really put them to rest.
Very willful.
Very vicious. George Cates.
Dolores Bell. David Wells.
You see what happens in the silence? Even within you. There's something that Spirit does in that actually can't happen any other time. It has to happen when we pause. You say Terry Bishop, and I think running shoes. Yeah, yeah. You say Steve Montgomery, and just last night I think about we celebrated a wedding here, and then at the reception there were some folks who haven't come back yet for all sorts of different reasons. They will, but we talked about Steve. Barbara, to your point, countless people whose lives we haven't been able to celebrate. We haven't been able to grieve together. I think it's interesting you named that. Rick, you named it earlier too, this idea of grief. We had this great pause. And my general sense of where we are right now as a society and as a church even, is that we are moving rapidly, desiring to move rapidly back to this place that we were before, without acknowledging together collectively what we've just navigated and what we even to some extent still are navigating. And that is to say that there can be a lot of loss if we don't take the time that we need and the space that we need to really wrestle with that, to grieve it together, to process it, to understand God in the midst of it, without hurrying on to the next thing. And it seems to me that when Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest," he actually meant it. He says, collectively as a society, as a church, you're carrying a heavy burden. It can be wearisome. Come and rest. And in that rest, you will find community. You will find connection to each other and to the divine. In that rest, you will learn. You will learn from God, learn from Christ, and you will realize that the burden is lighter than you imagine. Now, today we talk about rest, and then we talk about what it looks like to remember. And I'm cognizant of all the different things that we bring into this space, right? And all the different memories we have. So here's my charge. Here's my offering to you. And it's really a request. Create space in the next 7 days to spend time in deep rest, in intentional rest, where you are thinking and reflecting and remembering everything that you've had to navigate over the last 18, 20 months, right? Everything we collectively have had to navigate. And then take those petitions to God. Maybe share them with a friend too. It seems to me that we have to do that work before we move on to something else. We have to stay present in it. And I think that Jesus knows that intuitively about us and desires it for us. So, yeah, I was going to bring it right back around to value, to our value not being in what we produce, but who God created us to be. But I feel like I want to create a little bit more space for us in our remembering. So here's something I don't think y'all do in this class, okay? But we're going to go and we're going to break up into your tables, okay? Do y'all do this? Huh? See that? This is great. I'm dropping in. There are no rules. And I get to leave. Y'all can choose to ask me back or not. That's fine. So here's what I want you to do. And it looks like Gib, you might have to come over here. Yeah. Or yeah, you can break up like that. Yeah. Or you can do a foursome. Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. There's no rules on this. I want you to turn to your neighbor, and I want you to ask them who they're thinking about today on this All Saints Day. And I want you to pray for them. Okay? So you ask each other, you talk as long as you want to about the person that you are remembering, you're thinking about today, or the people, maybe countless, right? Then you pray for each other. And then we'll come back together and we'll pray together. I know it's more difficult to do in the chat, right? So it's not virtually as friendly as we'd like it to be. But we can do breakout rooms. Yeah, something like that. If you have a number of people on there, I don't know.
Nobody's showing video, so they can just chat. Or...
Okay, good. Okay, good. Show yourself if you'd like to. Yeah. Okay. All right. So turn to your neighbor, share the person you're thinking about, the people you're thinking about today, and then pray for each other.
Of course, I'm thinking about Terry. I'm thinking about Terry, and I'm also thinking about Azalee Stone. As well as many others.
Six people or so in the jail.
All right, y'all, if you haven't prayed for each other, go ahead and pray for each other. We'll draw ourselves back. Y'all can pray as long as y'all want to. Yeah. Barbara said, I think they're waiting on us. Yeah. Oh, no, that's good. So, yes. So, one of the stories in our ancient book is about people who were enslaved and made to make bricks. Day after day, every day. There was no rest from that brick making. Sometimes there would be straw. At one time there was straw to help connect, and then there was no straw. The brick making was difficult and more difficult at different times. But what that system of brick making was made to communicate to the enslaved people was that their value was solely on what they produced. Their value was based on how many bricks they made in a given day or a given week or a given year. They were judged solely by what they produced. So one of the reasons why this commandment about taking Sabbath and taking rest becomes so formative is because it is one of God's ways of communicating to the people that you are valuable, not because of what you produce, but because you belong to me. You can rest because you have value separate from, even in spite of what it is that you think you are produced in the world, a brick or whatever other image you can imagine, right? Rest, one of the reasons why it is so countercultural is because it says to ourselves and to the world that we, as God's creation, as God's beloved, have value separate from what we are doing, what we're producing. One of my favorite and most influential folks for me over the last year is a theologian by the name of Cole Arthur Riley. And she wrote a prayer that was helpful for me yesterday. I wanted to read it to you today as a prayer for each of us as we rest and as we remember today. We're gonna go into worship and we're gonna have that necrology and we're gonna read out a bunch of names, and some of them will be names of people who just passed, and there will be the ringing of a handbell, right? It will be a bass note, as Howard Thurman talks about. It is this bass note for us, this grounding note, and there are going to be a lot of things that come up for you. And so in the midst of that, I just want us to be grounded and ready as we move into that space. So I'll invite you into a word of prayer with me, written by Cole Arthur Riley, and then I'm going to open it up for 10 minutes of open floor for any questions y'all might have. Okay, so whatever your prayer posture is, let's pray. God who rests, we want more than a life lived exhausted. That you have woven healing rhythms of rest into our minds and bodies. Remind us this day. Remind us that we are worthy of habitual restoration, one day in 7. Keep us from apologizing for our own healing that takes place in the midst of rest. Keep us from apologizing that we would enter a deep belief that when we pause and rest, we are restoring not only our own bodies, but the very condition of a world held captive by exhaustion and utility. We grow weary of societies who view us as mere machine rather than human, more a product than a soul. The fear that we won't survive without overworking stalks our days. So liberate us from the depraved socioeconomic structures that require that the poor and the vulnerable sacrifice their own rest at the altar of survival and opportunity, and protect us from fear as we rest with you. Make us fully present, that we might hear what it is you want to communicate to us, that we might remember, that we might be renewed. Breathe your breath into us as we rest this day. For we ask in the name of Christ Jesus. Amen. All right, y'all. So now we'll set that aside. And if y'all have anything that y'all is on your mind or on your heart that you wanted to ask of me as pastor or as teacher this day, more than happy to entertain any of those questions. And if you don't, that's fine too. You just get out a little bit early. It's fine. Yes, Rick Baker.
I just want to thank you for being flexible today and throwing part of your lesson out and letting together this space. I pray that we can find a way to do this congregation-wide basis. To conclude with a celebration of life. The way we can do that, I'd be so grateful.
Yeah. We're talking about doing, first of all, thank you. We're talking about doing a service of wholeness and healing, which is a traditional thing for us, as I understand it, during the Advent season, and it's something I'm used to doing. I think there's some point that needs to happen. It might be in the new year, maybe even at the baptism of Jesus, where we celebrate. Like today, we're going to read the baptisms and the deaths, right? Because your baptism is complete in your death. And I think there's a time when we can celebrate that and name together, celebrate baptisms and name together all of our grief and all the people that we've lost collectively. Yeah, so we'll work on that. Yes.
I have a prediction that might not be correct. And not that it's the greatest generation coming back from World War II, but I have felt strongly throughout this whole thing that as people have reflected, and my offering of the word loss is loss of relationships, loss of, just people who you would be with, alive people, loss of particular people. But to me, the opposite of loss for our church is that people who have been members of the church, specifically our or members of a church or members of any faith community, if they've thought about it since March 2020, they've realized that they've had to get down on their hands and knees to get through this. And I hope, my prediction is that I think we're going to have a resurgence of consistent attendance in faith communities, whether it's Christian, Buddhist, I know I couldn't have got through it. This is my first time to come to a Sunday school class, because I had to be in person to hear you instead of at home on Zoom. But that's just, I think that's the opposite of the grief and the law, and any of the negative words that I think that we came up with today. I think there is a positive side of that can come out of that for our church.
I hope she's right, but I know a lot of ministers who are scared that the people won't come back. And that's a big fear.
Because there's live stream, or because they've been gone so long?
Because
I can speak to that if you want me to. Yeah. Barbara, I think you're right. I think it's interesting. What you're describing though is the divine pattern of the faith that we claim.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that there's death and there is resurrection.
Yeah.
Right, and there's this pattern that continues to happen. Well, we'll mark it down. We'll give you credit. No.
So what do you think to Barbara's?
I was, to Barbara's point, gosh, I think it's going to impact different faith communities differently. This is all, I'm just hypothesizing, right? But I think it's going to impact different faith communities differently. I think that incarnate, being in the flesh with one another, being incarnational with one another is something that was kind of lost. And not that, and that we recognize as lost. And so I do think I could see there being a beautiful movement back to reclaiming that. Y'all remember post 9/11, right? There was this like real strong movement back to faith traditions, and then this slow movement back away. My hope would be that this slow movement back away, that some of these virtual pieces actually would help to keep people connected in different ways. I know there are a lot of pastors similar to, in a different way. It's not the same thing, but similar to people who were running schools and other things that turned on an entire big institution turned on a weekend. March 13th was Friday the 13th, right? And that was when it turned on a weekend. And I'll tell you, I know a lot of pastors that are fearful. I also know a lot of pastors that are just dead tired, right? And I transitioned here, and we had the vaccines, and we were going to do all our in-person meetings in April and all that stuff, and now here we are. So I think that you'll have a mass exodus of pastors, and then I think you'll have a lot of churches that will come back looking different. I think you have a lot of people who have found different faith communities during this time because of virtual options. And a lot of people who have found other practices in their life that maybe they find more valuable now. So what does that mean? What does that look like, Barbara?
Well, I was just gonna say, yesterday, we had a retreat at Judy Johnson's farm. It was so wonderful, and then I was at the wedding last night, and at both occasions, much of the discussion was, it's so good to be with people and to not be covered up. And it was just so good to be with people. And so maybe that will draw people back. I don't know. I don't know.
Speaking of that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, speaking of, what's the position about continuing to wear masks?
Oh, I wasn't sure of that question. So
She started
it. Cat's going to need to meet again before the session meeting this Wednesday. So we had made the decision Cat had made the decision not to go unmasked, particularly as it related to or to make masks optional, for fully vaccinated people. I would qualify all that before the installation, because we knew there were going to be a ton of people in there. And so felt like that was a responsible decision. But hopefully we'll have some announcements coming soon, but the session has to debate that and decide that on Wednesday. This coming Wednesday they meet.
I think a lot of people are using it as an excuse not to come back.
I think it's interesting.
I had a lot of friends who said, I'm not coming back.
Well, and rubber's gonna meet the road here at some point. Yes, I agree, yeah.
It cuts both ways.
Yeah, it does.
You know,
It does.
my daughter didn't want to come because she felt we weren't safe enough.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah. Yes, Lynn. And then we'll come to Perry.
I hate to say this, it's gotten so easy to stay home and watch Sunday school on Zoom.
Yeah.
If people in my class would just say, hey, it's really okay if you come in your jeans, I bet you I'll be here all the time,
Make it pajamas in your
Turn the Zoom on.
Yeah.
T-shirt jeans, I'd be here.
Listen, I was recording all the worship in Madison before, and I did like 9 YouTube videos. And then on Sunday morning, I was drinking coffee and watching my other friends preach. And I was like, this is what y'all do. This is amazing. There's something about that. Very-
You know, even things like masks and vaccines have become dividers. And the violence that
It
there
was so.
you know, in a room of people like this, that maybe just hate and violence, and I can't stand what you're saying, you know, and I'm right. And I want to pray for some coming together, some tolerance.
Yeah, okay. I think it'll be interesting to see how a church, a big tent church like Idlewild too, can be can model a different way of being community than the predominant models that we see right now in society. So you were gonna ask what I mean by that? No, okay.
I just had an
Different.
idea.
Okay, got it.
I'm hearing.
Yeah.
I'm
So.
old enough if I don't say it, I'm forgetting.
I got it. Yeah, so I think that would be interesting is how do we as Christians navigate, or as people of faith navigate the really difficult things? Because the reality is once the masks come off, it'll be something else,
Okay.
you know? And then we'll have to figure out how we navigate that too. What were we gonna say, so you don't forget it?
So I don't forget.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm an old person, you know? Well, I want to be more divisive then. I suggest, why don't we let people sit on one side of the aisle if they want to go without a mask, and on the other side if they want to wear a mask. I mean, seriously,
Hang on.
and then,
We can.
yeah, we have to.
Daniel's about to he's like, we're getting way deep into it. Yeah, the COVID advisory team will continue.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, the COVID advisory team will continue to meet and the section will continue to make decisions. And the fun part of having 30 people in a Zoom room to have that debate is that's Presbyterianism at its core. We're making the sausage, you know. Y'all have thoroughly enjoyed this and getting to see y'all here in person. Thanks for letting me be here and be a part of it. And I'm gonna go get prepped for worship. Hope you all have a great Sunday.